Hello, my name is Emily Winter and I'm a researcher at Lancaster University, and I'm going to be presenting on agility in transdisciplinary research, lessons learned from a research sprint on digital technologies and flood risk management. This presentation reports upon a piece of retrospective qualitative research that was carried out to assess the effectiveness of the approach taken by a transdisciplinary research project on flooding the previous year. So both of my co-authors, Mary and Gordon, were involved in the flooding research, whilst I had no prior involvement in that project and came in purely to conduct the retrospective research. This presentation is structured into three main areas. So firstly, I will talk about the context, that is the need for approaches and ways of working that enable transdisciplinary research, and the approach that was taken in a transdisciplinary research sprint on flood risk management. Secondly, I will talk about methods, the interviews that I conducted with researchers and partners involved in the flood sprint. And thirdly, I will present upon the key findings from the research and the lessons learned during the flood sprint. Environmental challenges are defined by their complexity and their uncertainty, and this demands transdisciplinary approaches. Transdisciplinarity has become something of a buzzword, and I will just define it here. So Matter et al. Define transdisciplinarity as spanning disciplinary boundaries, being problem-focused, and integrating knowledge through mutual learning. This need for transdisciplinarity is well acknowledged, but we know a lot less about what it might look like in practice to actually work in a transdisciplinary way. So this work responds to this gap, and we present on the approach taken by a one-year research sprint that was focused on the role of digital technologies in flood risk management. This brought together a transdisciplinary research team involving researchers from computer science, environmental science, statistics and design, as well as flood risk experts from both public, i.e. governmental, and private sector agencies. And a key question moving into this research was how to enable effective collaborative transdisciplinary work, particularly because there are several challenges associated with transdisciplinary work, such as how to effectively communicate and how to manage competing demands from different stakeholders. While some work has presented theoretical frameworks to aid transdisciplinary research, such as some thinking around, for example, boundary objects and boundary settings, our focus here is also on more practical mechanisms to enable effective transdisciplinary research. So we'll just talk briefly about the flood risk management domain. So flooding is an increasingly critical area. Between 1995 and 2015, the UN estimated that 2.3 billion people around the world had been affected by flooding. And with climate change, we can expect future increases in extreme weather-related events. Flood risk management has also changed as a discipline, from being thought of primarily as an engineering field to increasingly spanning the disciplines, considering the risk to people and communities, economies, ecosystems, and cultural heritage. It is also a domain that has many challenges, particularly in terms of how to make sense of highly complex and heterogeneous data. This data may be qualitative, quantitative, structured, unstructured, and it may encompass very varied temporal and spatial scales. In considering the problem of how to approach this research and enable a transdisciplinary research project, the flood sprint took inspiration from SpeedPlay, a research management framework that had also been developed at Lancaster. This framework was developed to enable effective ways of working in partnership with hard-to-reach communities such as homeless people and people with autism, whilst in a fast-paced research environment. To do so, SpeedPlay brought together a series of principles drawing from participatory design, action research, and AGILE software development principles. So within software development, Agile is an approach that is designed to embrace frequently changing requirements and to do so by employing short iterative development cycles that aim to regularly produce working software. The Flood Sprint did not rigidly apply speed play as a set methodology, but rather hoped to mirror its mindset by adopting 4 key Agile principles. These were partnership, reflectiveness, iteration, and openness to change. These principles were supported by a range of mechanisms. So these included mechanisms to enable communication and sharing, such as show and tells. Prototyping was a very important part of it as well. In addition, the very idea of the sprint was also a key mechanism, flooding being the first of several domains explored as part of a larger research programme exploring the role of digital technologies in different environmental domains. So the yearly sprint cycle aimed to facilitate intense deep dives into different knowledge domains and deliver working prototypes over a shorter time frame. The approach taken in the Flood Sprint hoped to enable effective transdisciplinary work, embed stakeholders into the research process, and facilitate the design, development, and implementation of digital prototypes. So the retrospective research aimed to explore to what extent the Agile approach succeeded in doing this. So as part of the retrospective research, I conducted interviews with 14 people. These included the project's PI, the project administrator, all the research staff, representatives from the key partner organisations from outside the university, as well as steering committee members. This was a purposeful sample that was designed to include all those that had been centrally involved, but also to gather a broad range of perspectives, including those that had been more peripherally involved. The interviews were semi-structured and they were bookended by 2 participative exercises. So at the start, I asked interviewees to draw a timeline of the Flood Sprint. This functioned to jog the memory of participants about something that had happened the previous year, but it also worked as a sort of retro, the retro being an agile tool that is designed to encourage reflection on the high and low points of a completed sprint cycle. At the end, participants were invited to complete a card ranking exercise, ranking a series of possible characteristics of the Flood Sprint according to how present they were. I presented these words and phrases to participants as perceived or hoped for advantages of the Agile approach, but participants were also asked whether any of them had a more negative or neutral side. So, what did I find from this research? So one of the key principles that the Flood Sprint hoped to embrace was partnership. Both the core research team and the partners from outside the university identified a very positive collaboration and a strong relationship built. So one of the researchers mentioned the constant communication and constant collaboration. The project administrator commented that the partners came to feel like they were part of the team, which was echoed by one of the partners who said that they definitely were considered part of the project team. As well as working closely together, the partners were also central in shaping the work and its direction. Initially, there had been a large group of stakeholders, but the research team ended up working particularly closely with a small number of these who became identified as super participants or champion partners. So a key lesson learnt here was to identify these people and to prioritise a small number of in-depth relationships rather than a broader but shallower network. When it came to reflectiveness, iteration and openness to change, which are all quite linked, there were mixed opinions on reflectiveness. So some members of the core research team felt that the process was highly reflective, whilst others didn't. One of the partners commented that at times it was so fast-paced, perhaps there wasn't the time to reflect. And this shows a conflict between the desire for reflectiveness and the inherently fast-paced nature of a one-year sprint. Almost all of the interview participants stressed the iterative approach that had been taken and its openness to change. The project administrator, for example, highlighted the flood sprint as a cyclical process of do something, review, make changes, do something, review, make changes. And one partner also commented on the willingness to change of the research team. There were many mechanisms put in place to enable communication and sharing, both within the research team and between the research team and the partners. So the sprint commenced, for example, with a workshop that brought together the core team and flood risk management experts. The outcome from this first workshop was a series of 4 co-created storyboards, with 2 of these being then taken forward throughout the flood sprint year. At the end of the sprint, there was another workshop where the prototypes were demonstrated. Throughout the year, show and tells were used to keep in touch with partners. From the interviews that I conducted, there was a strong sense that communications and sharing within the core team did not work so well. And there was a conflict between a desire for more structure that was expressed by some interviewees and desire not to impose structure and allow for flexibility that was expressed by others. However, I did find that the desire for more structure was more prevalent, and in particular, a desire was expressed for better mechanisms to share and document research progress and work, particularly changes that had been made along the way. It's worth noting here that use of AGILE-inspired tools such as whiteboards did not particularly catch on. The show and tells, which were conducted virtually, did also not work so well, and several participants commented on how the format led people to fall into roles, so the researchers very much felt like they were presenting to partners for feedback rather than it being more genuinely collaborative. However, much of the collaboration with partners occurred in a more informal and face-to-face way, particularly with those partners that were geographically located close by. And this was something that was seen as very successful, and it particularly enabled partners and researchers to prototype collaboratively. One researcher, for example, highlighted the use of technologies that were supportive of iterative programming to enable this. So what this seemed to suggest was that there was a need for some more formal mechanisms for internal collaboration, but collaboration with partners in fact worked best when it was more informal. The sprint cycle, intense yearly dives into different research domains, was seen by interview participants to have both advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, it was seen to be timely and to be more aligned with practitioner timescales. It also gave a strong provision of focus, and because the flood sprint was followed up by sprints that dealt with biodiversity and soils, it was seen to allow for the research team to begin to make connections between different environmental challenges and the role of digital technologies in responding to these challenges. On the more negative side, the research team particularly experienced the year-long timeframe as quite pressurised. There was also a sense that the sprint ended just when key progress was being made. This was particularly hard for the research team, some of whom had no background in flooding and so had to quickly get up to speed before then moving on to the next sprint. The flood sprint produced many digital prototypes that investigated appropriate software architectures and tools to support a more data-centric approach to flood risk management. Agile-style techniques, such as user stories, were used to aid this prototyping process. As I've already mentioned, prototyping enabled engagement and collaboration with partners. However, there were some disadvantages. Partners, for example, were not sure how they would be able to use the prototypes in their current form, though they were excited by the ideas demonstrated. There was also a bit of a tension here for some of the research team who felt that the prototypes were a way to express and generate ideas rather than being a working product for the partners to use. Finally, to return to the research questions, did the approach achieve what it hoped to? In terms of collaboration, the picture is quite mixed. The researchers worked meaningfully with partners, but did not work together so well or collaboratively as a research team, struggling to integrate their different academic backgrounds. However, when it came to embedding stakeholders into the research process and facilitating the design, development and implementation of digital prototypes, the approach taken did enable both these things to be done effectively. Thank you so much for your time.